Hello singers, teachers, and friends. This is a more robust version of my introduction to the NATS plenary session that I moderated for a recent virtual national conference. I encourage you to watch the video of our panel discussion, and you'll find a link to that video in the comments. Because we had only a short time to cover a tremendous amount of ground, I had to kind of blaze through my opening. I have some more to say, and I also have a little more tea to spill than would be appropriate for a NATS-sponsored presentation, so I wanted to expand on my remarks. Thanks for taking the time to listen. Singing is a balancing act. We need to express ourselves with great vulnerability, and we also need to develop the confidence to feel safe doing so. We need the courage to take risks, and we also need the ability to know the boundaries of our comfort zone so that we don't stray too far outside it for our own well-being. We must be willing to trust our teachers, directors, conductors, and one another, while also taking care not to allow people to violate our boundaries. Opera and concert productions are often collaborative enterprises on a massive scale, so we have to participate in a highly interdependent culture while also maintaining our own independent voices within it. Because so much of our repertoire was created in a century or two or three in the past, there are traditions that we must study and master, while also creating performances that are informed by modern sensibilities and individual points of view. So we need balance, but we find ourselves dealing with a culture that has fallen out of balance with regard to these qualities. It's impressed upon us that we must express ourselves with vulnerability, but our institutions do not always instill us with the confidence we need to really speak our truth. We are sometimes expected to have the courage to leap far outside our comfort zones without really being taught that there is such a thing as too far. We're often expected to place blind trust in teachers and authority figures who really do not merit that trust. And when that trust is betrayed, we find that we have little recourse. Rather than learning to be collaborative and interdependent, our culture encourages us to actually be dependent in many ways. Dependent on the supervision of your voice teacher, without whom you'd have no way of knowing whether or not you're singing well. Dependent upon authority figures who will reward you with opportunities and validation if you work hard and behave yourself. Dependent upon the financial largesse of scholarship funds and patrons, because there is an extravagant investment of time and money required before any of us gets to the point where there's any hope of earning a living as a singer. And rather than balancing tradition with our own originality and initiative, there is this ongoing pressure to learn how it's done, an emphasis on getting it right, sometimes to the exclusion of learning how to channel our own expressive impulses through the music that we love. One of the things that perpetuates this imbalance and leaves us vulnerable to exploitation is the structural scarcity that pervades our training programs, as well as the performance industry. We accept far more voice majors into performance degree programs than we can provide with opportunities to perform leading roles, participate in master classes, and so on. Not everyone who needs financial aid has access to it, so we sometimes end up with situations where if there's a voice department where it feels like the students who get all the opportunities are the ones on merit scholarships, while the whole program is being funded by the full tuition students who rarely land leading roles. If the skill levels of the teaching faculty are uneven, as is often the case, well then there's scarcity with regard to competent studio instruction. And then once we're out in the professional world, there are fewer audition slots for performing opportunities than people who would like to apply for them. So you may find it difficult to even get heard by those in a position to hire you. And even information about how to pursue a quality education and launch a performance career can be very hard to come by. Which, not so incidentally, that's why I wrote the Singer's Audition and Career Handbook. You'll find a link with information on the book in the comments, and this isn't so much a shameless plug for the book, but some encouragement to educate yourselves about how things really work, because this world remains much more difficult to navigate than it ought to be. Information is scarce, where figuring out whether your exorbitant tuition will turn out to be a good investment, whether a given opportunity will open doors or be a waste of time and money, whether you're ready for prime time or still need to develop some crucial skills, and so on. One of the areas where you most need information that is difficult to come by has to do with performance standards. I'm going to make a sweeping generalization here, which is that most voice performance degree programs completely sidestep the issue of standards. What is the standard of performance skill that an undergraduate performance major or a singer completing a Master of Music degree should exhibit upon graduating? In my opinion, the undergraduate should be capable of making competitive applications to excellent graduate programs. The graduate student should be ready to go to work. Maybe their next step will be a resident artist program, or maybe they'll start pursuing professional contracts, but either way, they should leave their grad program with the full skill set that would make them professionally viable. But in general, our programs do not clearly state any such standards. This absolves them of the responsibility of making sure that their curricula prepare every single student to meet such a standard, or to implement individual assessments throughout the program to make sure they are on track, and to create solutions if they're not on track. The industry also does not express clear performance standards. You could argue that casting professionals should be free to express their own artistic tastes when hiring singers, rather than adhering to any defined standard of excellence, and while this argument does have merit, it also gives casting professionals cover should they wish to quietly discriminate against singers who belong to a marginalized population. When you consider that our teachers, our casting directors, and our institutions as a whole have so little accountability, it should not be surprising that the culture itself lends it so well to exploitation of the vulnerable. We have so little oversight of studio teachers. We don't know what's going on behind that closed door. If a student is being underserved and failing to progress as a result, it could be for any number of reasons. Perhaps the teacher is incompetent. Perhaps the teacher is stereotypically negligent type who runs out the clock on lessons, talking on the phone, or regaling students with anecdotes from their glory days on stage. Perhaps they're the stereotypically abusive/possessive type who gets progressively more domineering and then accusatory if the student fails to respond to their methods. And perhaps they are even engaging in sexual misconduct. In many cases, we have no way of knowing due to a dearth of accountability and oversight. And it is so easy to just conclude that when a student fails to achieve excellence, it's on them, the student, because they didn't have the aptitude, or they didn't have the discipline. And hey, so few singers achieve excellence anyway, and since we didn't establish the standard we expected them to meet in the first place, let's just say it wasn't meant to be. Similarly, when we leave a singer alone with a coach or a conductor, either in school or in a professional scenario, when there's a problem, we tend to draw the same conclusion. It's too much trouble to investigate an authority figure, a celebrity conductor, and just too easy to blame and replace the singer when things aren't working out. So here's where I really need to call out AGMA, our union, for their gross and ongoing lack of activism and responsibility to protect their members from sexual misconduct in the workplace. I am so ashamed of our union, the way they unapologetically and consistently do a stellar job of defending their members who are accused of sexual misconduct, while continuing to shirk their responsibility to protect members from sexual harassment and assault, and to support victims who wish to report those crimes. You can see the comments for a link to an essay that goes into greater detail about their negligence. For now, suffice it to say that other entertainment unions, Actors Equity, SAG-AFTRA, they have much stronger policies and procedures in place to protect and support their members, while AGMA lags inexcusably behind. We also have a systemic transparency problem, and you know what, while I'm on about AGMA, I'll call them out about this now too. Because this is another area where they should really show leadership, but instead model the secrecy that is so harmful in our culture. I'll link to another essay that goes into these problematic details as well, but consider the fact that all proceedings of their Board of Governors meetings are covered by a draconian confidentiality policy that prohibits Board of Governor members from sharing anything with the membership or the public. A union's highest authority are its members, and in this case the members don't even get to look at the meeting minutes or find out how officers and Board of Governor members voted on a given issue. Anyway, we're accustomed to a culture where there is very little transparency. When a voice teacher is secretive about their methods, we just take for granted that it's for some good reason, rather than a cover-up for the fact that they're a snake oil salesman in a scarf. We buy into this myth that success depends heavily upon innate talent and a measure of luck, and so when a singer doesn't succeed, it's, again, because it wasn't meant to be, not because those entrusted with their education let them down. Yes, our profession is competitive, but singing is a combination of skills that can be taught and mastered. And the rules of the business can also be learned and applied, and if this isn't true, if it's really all about talent and luck, then how dare we charge high tuition and award degrees if we really believe it's all so mysterious? So that's an example of a pretty problematic financial practice, charging all this tuition when we don't actually expect most of our students to get the result they're paying for. My fellow panelist, Zach Finkelstein, gave a presentation that addresses financial inequity, and he also created an expanded version of his talk that I recommend you take a look at, so see the comments for that link. What I want to cover here is just my feeling that we are essentially training young singers to get ripped off. When I was offered admission to a prominent conservatory for grad school, I trusted them. I thought, oh, they accepted me because they believe I have what it takes to become a successful professional singer. I know that I have a fierce work ethic, and I'm going to do my part to excel. So I'm going to go ahead, I'm going to take out those tens of thousands of dollars in student loans to enroll in this program because it will be a smart investment in my future career. Well, when I completed that program, I joined the ranks of what must be thousands of singers who complete graduate performance programs every year without being anywhere near professionally viable. And now, on top of it, I was carrying all of that student loan debt. You know, I never blamed the school or my teachers there, not until many, many years later, because there was never any guarantee, and hey, it just must not have been meant to be in my case. I took that blind trust with me into the field and ended up shelling out hundreds of dollars for a NIOP audition that could never have led to anything, shelling out hundreds more to perform with a so-called opera company that required the singers to foot the bill for production costs in the hope of selling enough tickets to make our investment back. I'm not going to spill any more tea here about the NIOPs in the narrative, but I will leave a link to a blog post that I wrote about it in the comments. Our culture encourages us to prioritize seeking validation from the outside rather than affirmation from within in a number of ways. Mostly because our musical traditions are so complex and important, it's possible to spend most or all of our energy learning how to do things right, rather than learning to use those traditions as a conduit for our own ideas and feelings. The structural scarcity I talked about earlier means we have these gatekeepers who get to dole out goodies like performance opportunities and audition slots to their favorites, and so we all learn to curry favor with them. The scarcity of opportunities mean the gatekeepers can and often do choose the singer they think is the prettiest, and so as a result we learn to try to make ourselves into their version of pretty, and then we feel bad if we can't. The supply of singers far exceeds the demand, and so we hope and pray to get that validation, that big break that needs to be given to us from someone else, so that we can escape from the sense of invisibility and won't fade into the crowd. Where all of these issues are concerned, our industry leaders have been pretty much tacit except to pay some occasional lip service, usually too late to be either helpful or credible. For an example, we need look no further than the Metropolitan Opera. They have repeatedly demonstrated their priority of protecting themselves from liability rather than protect their workers from harassment, discrimination, and financial marginalization. They employed and glorified known sexual predators, James Levine and Placido Domingo, for decades because it helped their bottom line, only reluctantly severing ties once major stories hit the mainstream press while absurdly denying any knowledge of these men's revolting behavior towards more vulnerable musicians. This is not an anomaly. I imagine that most of you are aware of predators currently employed by academic and producing organizations, where it's a so-called open secret that no one does anything about because their victims are afraid to come forward or got paid to keep quiet once they did come forward. Where discrimination is concerned, at this moment all of our institutions have strong motivation to take a clear stand on the systemic racism and inequity that pervades our culture. This is an opportunity to stand up for what's right, and I applaud those institutions that are doing a meaningful job of it. But we are more commonly seeing things happen like a prominent faculty member is publicly accused of racist comments or behavior, and then there's a tepid, reactive, empty apology, when what we need is for our institutions to conduct some serious soul-searching and commit to a major course correction. And by the way, if you think you know a specific example that I'm referring to here, well, honestly, there are too many specific examples to call anyone out. We don't need a scapegoat right now. We need a comprehensive overhaul of our attitudes. This is where I get to reminisce about going to see the original Broadway production of A Chorus Line as a middle school chorus field trip. I still adore this show, but it helped to groom me to make impossible sacrifices in the name of this thing that I love so much, glorifying sacrifice as well as tits and ass. We'll do anything just to have a chance at that spotlight, and this leaves us vulnerable to exploitation throughout our studies and careers. Think about how difficult and traumatizing it is for any victim of sexual assault to come forward and seek justice. Now, think about how impossible it is for most of us, because even if you have the strength and the willingness to subject yourself to the indignities that inevitably follow such a disclosure, on top of that, add the fear of losing this precious thing that you love more than anything else in the world, that you worked so hard for. I find it not at all surprising that there are singers who, on top of all the other sacrifices, would sooner tolerate the indignity of sexual assault in silence than lose the ability to keep doing what they do for love. The good news now is that I see no reason why we cannot now take this opportunity to transform our culture. The Me Too and Black Lives Matter movements are showing us that change is possible, and they're providing a helpful vocabulary for discussing and addressing all of these issues. The pandemic has hit the pause button on all of our operations, and as a friend pointed out recently, it's much easier to repair an engine when it isn't actually running. So, while the engine of our industry is temporarily turned off, let's not just repair it, let's give it an upgrade. Find solutions that promote greater equity throughout our community rather than seek band-aids to patch up areas of inequality. Advocate for the culture we dream of rather than just reactively doing the minimum to mitigate isolated eruptions of racism or sexual misconduct. Talk amongst ourselves, speak truth to power, and demand transparency throughout our culture and industry, especially from those who purport to lead and protect us. When we bring balance to our culture, everyone benefits, and the expressive art we make will benefit too. We can't do our best work in a culture that feels oppressive, but we will thrive when there is true interdependence, support for the individuals unified by a common creative purpose. I'm not saying it will be easy. There are some difficult decisions ahead. If our training programs are to fulfill their promise to provide all of their students with a quality education and stop rubber stamping degrees for those who do not meet a high standard, we're going to have to find ways to pay for those programs that don't involve robbing full tuition students who probably shouldn't have gone into that program in the first place. For producing organizations to take an effective stand against racism and harassment, they will have to own up to the ways they enabled bad actors and failed to protect their workers in the past. Gatekeepers, administrators, and union officers who failed to take action in the past and are now out of step with the pressing need for change will have to be replaced. But I'm optimistic that we can accomplish all of these things together if we continue this conversation, be creative, and have the courage to question and dismantle those aspects of the status quo that disempower us. We will do it, and we will do it for love. A love stoked by activism rather than sacrifice. So, thanks again for taking the time to listen. Remember, this is our community. We can transform it to meet our ideals. We don't need to do anything the same way anymore just because it's the way things have always been done. Rise to meet the challenge.